I apologize for the technical difficulties getting started, but wanted to welcome everybody, especially our illustrious speakers, to this webinar, which is hosted by Burlington Electric Department on how biomass district energy is working in other communities. We have a terrific speaker lineup, which we are so grateful to each of you for coming from a very wide range of places around the country and the world. We have Rob Thornton, who is the president of the International District Energy Association, with perhaps the best acronym for an association out there, IDEA. I love it. We have Peter Cherry, who comes from Nova Scotia, Halifax, Nova Scotia, at Dalhousie University, Biomass District Energy Systems. And we have Ken Smith from St. Paul, Minnesota, Biomass District Energy System, and Markus Paulsson. Thank you for joining us from so far away, the city of Lund in Sweden, who is an energy strategist at the Department for Sustainable Growth. My name is Linda McGinnis. I will be the host and moderator of today's discussion, and just wanted to really warmly welcome all of you and thank you for giving us your time today. The way we'd like to organize this discussion today is that I'll give a brief introduction to the topic as it relates to Burlington, and then I'll invite each of the speakers to introduce themselves a little bit more formally, if you'd like, and present a bit about your experience with district energy. We hope that each of you can keep it to 5 to 7 minutes, which is always really difficult, but we'd like to have a lot of time for questions and interaction with you. Following your presentations, I'll kick off the discussion with a couple of questions that any of you can jump in and respond to. And then we'll try and keep the last 10 to 15 minutes available to cover some questions from the audience in the chat. So, and for all of you who have others who you think might be interested in the conversation, there will be a recording of this webinar available through Burlington Electric Department. So just wanted to make sure you knew that. So just to give a brief introduction to this very important discussion that is happening in Burlington as we speak, I'll just give a brief overview. And some of you may or may not be familiar, those in the audience will be, but some of the speakers may not be fully aware of what we're dealing with right here. But the bulk of Burlington's electricity comes from McNeil Generating Station, which is a 50 megawatt electric generator that was built 40 years ago to replace coal under a now famous but then mayor, Bernie Sanders. It runs on wood chips and is the largest power producer in the state of Vermont since Vermont Yankee Nuclear closed almost a decade ago. At full load, it generates enough for the electric needs of Burlington, but it also generates a significant amount of heat through steam and water, which has not yet been captured. So Burlington has been looking at this issue of district heat for approximately 40 years, and the concept was even included in the original permit. After decades of feasibility studies not leading to a project, Burlington's latest effort with Evergreen Energy has gone through 3 feasibility stages in the past 4 years and has resulted in, for the first time, a designed and engineered project that is shovel ready. And BED has secured over $5 million in capital funding from Senator Leahy to support the project. The impetus for pursuing the project is to significantly reduce emissions and fossil fuel use in Burlington. Capturing that heated water and steam to replace natural gas, which is the bulk of heating in Burlington, is one of the 4 key pillars in Burlington's Net Zero Energy 2030 roadmap, which was adopted in 2019 by the City Council to guide the city's decarbonization efforts. The roadmap focuses on reducing and eventually eliminating fossil fuel use in the thermal and ground transportation sectors. Now, according to the feasibility studies to date, district energy is projected to reduce commercial sector natural gas use by 16%, which would represent the single biggest step that Burlington could take to reduce emissions and fossil fuel use in a combined heat and power facility. Now, those who oppose the project argue that wood bioenergy should not be utilized at all for either electricity or heat, and that this project actually increases emissions, and that no further investment should be made to prolong the life of McNeil. Decisions are expected to be made on this project in the coming weeks by the City Council. So today, we would love to learn from your vast experience across the four of you with similar projects and how you might have addressed these challenges. So I'd like to start, if you don't mind, with you, Rob. Again, President and CEO of IDEA, the International District Energy Association, who'll give us an overview of district energy and trends in North America and some global framing as well. So Rob, over to you.
Very good. Thanks, Linda. Darren, are you able to share my slides, or should I do that?
I should be able to. Stand by, Rob.
All right, we're going to move quickly, so thanks, Darren. Very good. Well, thank you, Linda. Thank you for this opportunity. As she mentioned, my name is Rob Thornton. I'm the president and CEO of IDEA. Next slide, please. IDEA is a nonprofit industry association. We're located in Westboro, Mass, near Boston. This is our 114th year, formed in 1909. We have about 2,800 members worldwide in 28 nations, but majority in North America. And these are major urban utilities in Boston, New York City, Detroit, Philadelphia, et cetera. And then, of course, public and private colleges. University of Vermont is one of our members, healthcare, pharma, airports, any sort of clusters, campuses, and communities. And IDEA also has the technology providers, the service, and the business partners. So we're really a 501c6. Next slide. So what is district energy? It's often underground and out of view, but essentially it's a thermal grid. So there's central production of heat, power, cooling, and then there's an underground piping network that connects the customer buildings in a city or a campus or a cluster. So there's advantages to this. Next slide. That's a very simplified graphic, but essentially district energy, what it does is it combines the heating and cooling needs of sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds, thousands of buildings. And by doing that, creates a market for thermal energy. So aggregating the uses, heating and cooling requirements of a city or a district really creates the economies of scale to use technologies that may not be viable on a building by building basis. And this also creates opportunities for local generation, distributed generation, and frankly, enhancing the resilience of a community. At the same time, technologies can accelerate carbon reduction at scale. So think of it as a bunch of bananas, not a stem of bananas, not just a single piece of fruit. Next slide, please. Essentially, what we're seeing is future-proofing through district energy. Today's world, energy supply is becoming more critical, particularly with the heinous attack in Ukraine. Our friends in Europe are really experiencing, I think, some supply shortages. But essentially, district energy creates an opportunity for a local renewable energy sources, multiple inputs to a system, and you'll hear more about that, and the use of surplus heat that would otherwise essentially be wasted, dumped into the river or the sky or a bay. This is a way to, frankly, enhance the efficiency and resiliency of a city. Next slide. District energy really is nothing new. It's quite ubiquitous, particularly in North America. There are over 900 operating systems across North America, US, and Canada. And these are dots on the map where we have data. These are not necessarily member systems of IDEA, but you see there's really quite a bit of district energy in operation around the US. Next slide. The industry has been growing steadily. We had a very positive trend between 2014 and 2019. Obviously, a COVID dip, as one would expect. But this is the square feet of space that our members have indicated are joining, and it's broken by stacked categories of government buildings, hotels, residential, et cetera. And this information will be available in more granular detail to anyone. But essentially, the point I want to make here is that we're growing at about 52 million square feet per year. And this is really not all members or all systems, but essentially our members that are reporting it. What's driving this? Next slide. We're seeing essentially, an energy transformation, a paradigm shift from remote generation where heat is wasted to more local generation in cities and in communities. Next slide. And why is this? Cities are now seeking local generation, enhanced resiliency, sustainability. I think the galvanizing moment was Sandy in October 2012. We saw really how at risk the grid was, how our economies were. 80 million people without power for days on end. And that's leading to, I think, a recognition that local energy has some distinct advantages in terms of efficiency, resiliency, sustainability, and additionally carbon. Next slide. So what we're seeing now is a shift to lower carbon resources, away from fossil fuels. We're seeing more decentralized microgrids and CHP, and that's what McNeil Station represents, an opportunity to, you're currently making electricity for the local energy market, but also augmenting that by using the heat, creating opportunities for a circular economy. I think Ken Smith will talk more about the, how sort of waste wood is being converted into, instead of filling landfill, it's now a resource. And additionally, when you have a thermal grid, you can share heat and sort of drive integration of additional technologies as they become commercially viable. So public sentiment is driving this, economics are driving this, and obviously severe weather events. This is really, it's a pretty evident. Next slide, Darren, please. Superstorm Sandy, we had Harvey flooding. Next slide. Not to be histrionic, but wildfires are now part of the everyday lexicon. It's so frightening that climate change is manifest in these, I think, threats to society. Next slide. And really now it's become, and this is just the climate disasters last year, it's billions of dollars in losses, economic losses. Obviously, loss of life is of paramount importance, but the frequency and severity of climate events is really, I think, driving more recognition that our grids and our infrastructure need reinforcement and reinvestment. And I think the McNeil plant represents an opportunity for that. Next slide, Darren, please. So local community, just going to bump through these quickly, just kind of click it and we'll jump. So why have a district energy system? It's a build slide, Darren. I'm sorry. Could you just click? So to increase efficiency and improve resiliency during extreme weather events, utilizing local energy supply, not relying on power plants hundreds of miles away or even even outside of the economy, improving your trade balance by using these local resources, putting thermal energy to use in a community. It actually creates opportunity for more resilient sources, and essentially customers want to be sourcing their energy from cleaner, greener, more resilient supplies, and it adds to the local tax base. It generates municipal income. Next slide. I'm going to close this out now. I wanted to obviously cutting emissions is a primary driver now. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, and IDEA, we sit on this board for the district heating segment. They say that getting to the climate, mitigating climate will require 350 million building units connected to district energy networks by 2030. This is critical, not only in Europe, but globally. So the IEA sees district energy as a key tool. Next slide. Also, the United Nations, they launched in 2014 at the UN Climate Summit in New York City. I was there. Sustainable energy for all. This is a very important, I think, resource for all of you. districtenergyinitiative.org. How district energy in cities is critical to achieving our carbon targets. And there are 45 cases in this report. I urge you to have a look at it at your convenience. And finally, Paris, where I think the global economies came together. Next slide. Paris has a really interesting integrated district energy network. They use the river water from the Seine to air condition the Louvre, really integrating geo exchange, waste to energy, all sorts of inputs to a very vibrant steam, hot water, and chilled water network that really is kind of hidden, but is critical to how Paris functions as an economy. So my last slide is this is the phrase that came out of the Paris meeting. Nations talk, but cities act. I'd urge the city of Burlington to take action and make use of the heat that's being produced at the McNeil power plant for your community and for your economy, and frankly for the benefit of all of us. And that's my slides, and I know we're going to move to more panel. My closing comment is, happy to take questions and reach out to me at your convenience. There you go, Linda.
Thank you, Rob. Wow, right in there on time. I'm going to switch now to Peter from Nova Scotia. If you could take over the wheel here.
Is that sharing now? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm Peter Cherry at Dalhousie University and primarily Halifax, Nova Scotia, but I want to talk to you today about our agricultural campus in Bible Hill. So by way of who we are and where we're at, we are at the northeastern end of Maine, and we have 4 campuses, 3 in Halifax and 1 agricultural campus in Bible Hill, 6 million square feet, 158 buildings. We're no stranger to district energy because in the 3 campuses in Halifax, probably about a 5-kilometer stretch is connected by our steam and hot water distribution systems to our central plant. Our agricultural campus is here in Bible Hill, Nova Scotia, about 100 kilometers outside of Halifax, 63 buildings, 900,000 square feet. So we had a dilemma a few years ago. We're not a stranger to biomass because for almost 30 years, we had a base-loaded biomass boiler that fed our steam distribution system in Bible Hill. But it experienced a crack in its casing, and the Department of Labor basically shut us down for almost a year and then imposed a pressure reduction, which basically said we couldn't use the boiler for a long term. We also had 40-year-old steam infrastructure that, of course, had issues such as you see here. And so we were presented with an opportunity where the province of Nova Scotia had a community feed-in tariff for which universities and municipalities, as an example, were eligible to develop green energy projects and export that power to the local provincial grid. And so we revised our concept of what we call combined or central heating plant to what I called initially central heat and power plant. The first element was moving away from the biomass combustor creating steam to the combustor at 5.4 megawatt thermal heating thermal oil, which to a temperature in the range of about 600 degrees Fahrenheit, which then fed what is called a organic Rankine cycle turbo generator. You can see our installed unit here, which was the first of its kind for university in North America. And as far as we know, it's still the only one in the university in North America. And so on the left, you can see the steam distribution system that we had. And on the right, the blue represents the hot water piping distribution that we put in effectively throughout the entire campus. We had a revised concept in terms of our biomass storage. We went with the dual fuel bins so that we could do research, and the intention was to try out blending of traditional biomass with emerging sources such as willow. You can see in the middle that there are actually 2 different types of biomass in the 2 different bins. And fairly complex control system that allows the raking speed and so forth for us to fairly accurately blend the different fuels. In terms of fuel, very strict guidelines or requirements from the COMFIT program. So you couldn't go out and cut down a tree and use it for fuel. It was only taking the residual from what was already happening. And so you weren't sort of cutting down trees needlessly. So there was a type issue, there was a trucking distance, and then there was a whole list of directive requirements in this very long appendix that they had. So right now we're using about 85% of sawmill residue, bark and shavings and dust. So we consume in the neighborhood of 24,000 tons a year, and average moisture content's about 47%. So we have tripled our biomass consumption from what it was before. In terms of ash, we're pretty proud of this. Previously, we produced, I'm going to say maybe 100 to 125 tons of ash. And because it was an agricultural campus, we were able to use it in our small farm, or farms, I should say there. But when it went to 400 tons of production, we didn't have the ability to use it. So off we went and had it certified as fertilizer grade through the Canadian Food and Inspection Agency. And now almost all the ash is used as a fertilizer at local farms. And so basically we have them pay for the transportation costs and we give them the product for free. So it's a pretty good deal for everybody. So of course, central energy plant is now what we call it, because it's hot water and electricity. And of course, where did they put the central heating plant or plant is right in the middle of the campus, as you can see here with my red circle. And so we elected to put in an electrostatic precipitator. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it basically is a particulate controller air quality device. Our stack height reduced from, I think, the previous 60 feet to 44 feet. It is 70 times cleaner than the previous system. And I won't get into that engineering terminology there. It's actually cleaner than natural gas emissions, apparently. And so, and of course, it exceeds codes and regulations. We wanted to be a good corporate citizen and not end up having to clean adjacent cars to the plant on a regular basis from the particulate fallout and so forth. So this is the performance. It's a little out of date since 2020 and 2021, but our electrical revenue is 11% higher than projected. Our consumption, or our costs are about 5.5% more than we intended. Our generation is up by 13%, and our cost per ton is basically 6% better than it was intended. And that's, I was told, going to be quick, so that's it for me.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions specifically about Dalhousie, but I think we might just keep it to the end and we'll circle back to you on those questions. Now I'd like to turn to Ken Smith from St. Paul, Minnesota Biomass District Energy System. Thank you, Ken.
Great. And Darren, if you could put my slides up, please. While he's doing that, I'm Ken Smith. I'm the President and CEO of District Energy St. Paul, and happy to be with you today. It's up. So just a little bit of background. This is our 40th year of operation. It's a district energy system. You can see in the lower left-hand corner, it was the community that came together and said, we need to do this for our community. They suffered through a lot of volatility from energy crisis in the 70s, had aging infrastructure, and the business community, the government. You see the mayor of St. Paul was heavily involved in making this system come to life and was installed and became operational in 1983. The groundbreaking was in March. Next slide, please. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. Public-private partnership came together to make this happen. We do use biomass as our primary source of thermal energy approximately 55 megawatts of renewable energy comes from that. We store, also have chill water storage. We are the largest hot water district energy system in North America currently. I know we're probably going to lose out to some folks in Canada here pretty soon. And we heat over 85% of the buildings in downtown. Over 30 million square feet is heated with the system. And we have hospitals, healthcare is our primary government, and you see the whole list there. We have a very diverse base of customers. If you can go to the next slide, please. We really do heat and cool the capital city, and so it is quite concentrated in the downtown area. Next slide. We survey our customers every year to get what's important to them, and we always know reliability is really key. Rob mentioned outages and impacts of storms. So while we are the North Star state, we get impacted by events, including in Texas a few years ago. The natural gas grid upset impacted us, where we had very little access to natural gas for 2 weeks. And so thankfully we had biomass, and we end up having to use fuel oil as well. Otherwise, its cost and rates are very important to our customers. Next slide. And they are very satisfied with the results that they get. We use a net promoter score, and this is our most recent survey results. So very, very high when utilities are typically in the -10 to 16 range for gas and electric utilities in the US. Our scores are well above that. Next. Next slide, please. As we compare, we're always comparing. All of our customers are not required to be on the system. They sign contracts to be on the system, and we have to compare what their alternatives are. One of the things that we're hearing more of is that buildings are wanting to spend more dollars on their tenants and less dollars on equipment, plus they have aging workforce to deal with operators, and so that is something that's been very beneficial to be on a district energy system. Next slide, please. We've also had 40 years of rate stability. We have operated below inflation the entire time for both heating and cooling, and we're going to continue that this next year. Next. We've also had tools that we put in place for our customers. We put in a portal and benchmarking tool that our customers have access to, real-time data, and that helps them become more efficient and operate the system, and also diagnose how their building is performing. Next slide, please. And so we've had continuous advancement. The biomass plant went operational in 2003. So we are now in our 21st year of operation. We have a goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. And so we're looking at integration of electrification of heating. And also we have a hydrogen project that we're going to be installing here soon. Next slide, please. On the biomass side, combined heat and power facility, 25 megawatts sold to the local electric utility, and then 55 megawatts of thermal energy is used for the district heating system. We use urban tree waste as our primary source of energy for this, and we have greenhouse gas emissions up to 80%, or 80,000 tons per year are eliminated as a result of that. Could you go to the next slide, please? Biomass sources. It comes largely from tree trimming, storm damage, diseased trees. You see the whole list there. We are being impacted by emerald ash borer now, and that's a significant portion of our materials coming in. We handle approximately 250,000 tons of woody biomass on an annual basis. I have a slide that comes next that just shows it's there was an independent study done that we're handling about 67%, or about 2/3 of the metro's wood waste is coming to this facility. And one of the things that's been interesting is we were at the end of our first power purchase agreement with Xcel Energy, and there was a question about whether they should continue to use biomass as a source of energy in the community. The legislature and others spoke loudly that it's very important to continue this. This is a flow diagram that was done by a third party on behalf of the counties to see where is this wood waste going, who's using it, and what would happen if we didn't use this material. And the result was it would be impossible to handle the wood waste in this community if it wasn't coming to our facility. our own pollution control agency. There was analysis done saying this would end up being open burned, and the impacts would be nearly $50 million in health impacts annually if we weren't using this material in this facility with back-end controls. We also have an ESP on the back-end controls. If it was, the alternative would be to haul it into rural areas and open burn it, which would certainly have a significant impact. And I'm going to stop there and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ken. And now let's move to Markus in the city of Lund in Sweden.
Thank you. Just need to unmute myself. Yes, thank you for having me here. I just want to show some of my slides. And I seems to be the only person from overseas. And I'm representing the city of Lund in Sweden. Now, and which is situated in the southernmost part of Sweden, and it's actually the oldest city in Sweden, founded by the Danish King Harald Bluetooth, which the Bluetooth technology is named after, since it was invented in Lund. Today, it is what we call a medium-sized city, but we are fastly growing. And what people mostly know about Lund is the university, since it's the largest university in Scandinavia. And we have already decreased our emissions, our carbon dioxide emissions from 1990 to 2018 by 50%. And we are now pursuing a net zero emissions by 2030. And one of the most important things we have done over the years is that we owned the power company Kraftlingen. The city owns the company Kraftlingen, together with 4 other municipalities. And they have made a tremendous effort in decreasing the emissions. So now, instead of the power sector having about 50% of the emissions of the geographical area, it now stands for 3%. So there has been a good journey there. And we have a very long tradition of using district heating networks, and we actually started already in the 1950s with the hospital as being the central point for this. And then it expanded to the campus area, but then also onwards to the whole city. And today, the district heating supplies 90% of the heat demand. That is not 90% of the buildings, but all the large customers are connected and use district heating. So maybe you saw the Paris picture before, but we have less than 1% of Paris population, but we have a longer district heating network than they have in Paris. And what is also a thing you could note that the total usage is 1,100 gigawatt hours of heat each year, but Kraftlingen only produces 970 out of this. That means that there are other operators that chip in energy into the system. So it is an open system in that way. So there are several production sites. And as I said, the emissions have been cut considerably. And in 2018, the last fossil fuel was used in this system, which we are actually very proud of. And that was due to the fact that we built this biomass-fired plant 5 kilometers north of Lund. That was started in 2018, and in the beginning there was some peat in the fuel, and that was removed in 2018, making it true fossil-free. And it produces both heat and electricity, roughly double size heat than electricity. And it uses a lot of biofuels, of course. Most of it comes from forestry residues, tops and branches and sawdust and things like that. but you also see a lot of damaged wood. We have a little bark beetle that kills spruces, so we need to remove those trees out of the forest quickly, so we don't get an infestation. And that is also something that can be used because it's not good for paper or timber. And also waste wood collected in our recycling facilities can be used here. And we are not unique in a sense that we are shifting fuels because we started in the 50s, just as many other cities in Sweden. We started with oil, and then there has been different phases where this has been replaced, and now biomass is the major source of fuel for these district heating systems. And this has continued up until today. And I forgot actually to say in the previous pictures that we also have a cooling district cooling network, but it's much smaller. It's about 10% of the size of the district heating system. So in a sense, our third generation system is not it's quite typical for a Swedish situation. But lately we have been building what we call a new generation of district heating systems with lower temperatures at 65 degrees Celsius. That is recovered heat that otherwise would have been wasted. So we now heat an entire new district of the city with this heating. And that has also made it possible to use different materials when building pipings, for instance, which has lower heat losses and therefore also lower production costs. So it is actually a very good thing, this new system. So for Burlington, I think you should you could leapfrog many old systems and go directly to the newer systems, I think would be a good example for you. That has actually given us an international award that the Global District Energy Climate Award that we got 2 years ago. And by that, thank you for the attention. And I think, Linda, back to you.
Thank you so much to each of our guests, and we'll move to some questions right now. I have some general questions that any of you can jump into and answer, and then we'll go to some of the questions from the audience in the chat. I would encourage those in the chat to ask questions directly of our presenters. It helps to be able to move the discussion beyond statements into questions. So we would appreciate that. But first, some general questions. You can see from the chat that there's a lot of conversation in Burlington about this. And it would be great to know what the general feeling in your communities are about your biomass district energy systems, and if it's well accepted, or does it generate any critiques? And if so, how do you address some of those critiques? It's a big question, but feel free to jump in.
I'll defer to Ken because I think really St. Paul has the direct experience there.
Sure, happy to. So our facility is right downtown on the Mississippi River. We're 1 block from City Hall. We're 1 block from the NHL stadium. So we're right in the middle of all of it. And there is a significant acceptance in our community of utilizing biomass. A lot of folks just don't even know it occurs. It's just, and when people tour the facility, they're surprised that we're using biomass at the facility. We had to have a variety of legislation done at the state legislature. And 2 years ago, when it was discussion about should we continue to utilize waste wood at this facility, We had a unanimous vote in the Senate, which never happens. And we had a very strong showing in the House on legislation that was specific to us, that this facility needs to continue. So it's supported by the agencies, by the Pollution Control Agency, by DNR, by Department of Agriculture, which gets involved in this as well, and by our customers, and in large part because the reliability that we're providing and the costs that we're providing to the customers. And so the overall experience of being on the system is quite favorable to them. We have a number of customers on our board of directors. Our city appoints members of the community on our board of directors. And so I would be hearing from all of them if it wasn't a good experience.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to jump in on that, or?
I'll just jump in. As a university, we can't do bad things. Just period. We're totally, or I should say, constantly up against public scrutiny. Our clients, our students, they expect us to be doing the right thing for the environment, and those are the major drivers for us. And so when it comes to this biomass plant, heat and electricity plant that grew 3 times to what it was, what we've done is effectively gotten off of fossil fuel, because there's only a select few number of hours that we would burn fossil fuel in the peak of winter, and then we burn it only in the summer when we do a 2-week shutdown for maintenance, and all that's doing is it's catering to a very small load. We did have a few events where, when you're starting up a plant as complicated as the one ours was, you had some upsets. And so, but none of the ESP performed perfectly. But every once in a while, someone said, "Is there a campfire burning?" But that's only a rare event where you have a low eversion day and we have an upset, which is very, very rare. So overall, I would say that the community at large, and both our student population, our educators, our researchers, as well as the Truro Bible Hill community are in full support of what we do.
Thank you. Another big question that is going around, and then I'll leap to some of the questions that are coming up in the chat, is how does your community distinguish between biogenic above ground carbon cycle emissions and geological below ground fuel carbon cycle emissions? That's been a big debate here locally, and I don't know if any of you want to try and address that.
Well, there is a big difference between below. I don't follow your debate actually, but if it's above ground, then it's part of the atmospheric carbon cycle, and if it's below ground, then it's you add carbon to the atmosphere. If I understand the question correctly. And if we were to count like trees as a carbon source, it doesn't have a net emission to the atmosphere, because it has taken up the carbon from the atmosphere from the beginning. So then it's just a circulation. And it's like when we breathe, we exhaust carbon dioxide every time we breathe. We don't count that. And I suppose the food we eat is come from natural sources.
I think we might be losing you, Markus. So I'm going to move right now to a couple of the questions that have come up in the chat, because we have about 15 minutes left. And one of them by Pike quarter, he has asked this of several of your systems, which is how efficient is your new system that you've put in? That's one general question for each of your systems. And then the second one for a couple of your systems is why hot water and not steam? So for those of you for who that's relevant, if you could answer those questions.
So on the hot water versus steam, our system was set up initially with hot water in St. Paul. And that was a learning from, frankly, from Sweden, from the Europeans that had moved from steam to hot water. So the system has been designed and operating now for 40 years with hot water. So we're what's considered a third generation system because of the temperatures and the technology that we use related to the hot water piping system. We are looking at integrating in lower temperature systems. We're looking at integrated in geo-exchange. And so you can kind of think of it as a thermal grid that you can integrate in a variety of technologies and a lot of energy, several different energy sources. Currently, biomass is a major source of energy for us. What was the first question, Linda? I didn't quite catch that.
How efficient is your new system?
Oh, the new system. I think that might be for Peter because he had the new system. I mean, as far as efficiency of the system, if we're taking waste heat from a cogen facility and moving it as hot water, it's considered 100% efficient delivered to the customers. They get to use whatever energy that they want to use. From the cogen facility, efficiencies would be in it depends on the time of year if you're utilizing all the heat, but it would be in the 65, 75% range for that facility.
Thank you, Ken. Peter or Markus or Rob, would you like to take on?
Sure. So from an efficiency perspective, I don't have the numbers at my fingertips. But what I would say, I was just to try to do this. Oops, sorry. Is it there? So this slide gives you an idea of how we use the fuel and what heat we haven't figured out how to use beneficially yet. Hence, we call it future available heat. And so this is what I spoke about earlier about the trimming in the very peak of winter. But this is a projection. This is actually even lower now because we converted the system to hot water. That we have very accurately measured as improving or reducing the consumption in the range of 25% or greater, simply compared to the steam distribution to the hot water distribution. And then it affords us, as Ken was saying, to do other things, injections into, because we started out that we wanted and I got to apologize, I got to speak in Celsius, not Fahrenheit, because I'm Canadian, eh? The design was 115 degrees Celsius, and we operated consistently below 90 Celsius with an objective of no greater than 65 in the summer, just simply to cater to domestic hot water loads. And so as you go through the cold periods to the warmer periods, the system efficiency is arguably, greater or less. But we do have initiatives where we are going to find a use for this future available heat, such as absorption cooling or such, where we're not using it, we can beneficially use it. We're unfortunately not very close to much urban infrastructure, so we can't really export that heat at sort of a economically viable fashion. So I hope that answered the question as best as I could.
All right.
So Linda, this is Rob. If I could just add, there are differences between steam district heating and hot water, and one of them, steam does have some distinct advantages in terms of a smaller diameter pipe through which you can move more energy because it is gas and has inertial energy, thermal energy, and can move equipment. And steam is used for humidification, sanitizing, hospital equipment, and actually it's used in process in Boston and Cambridge. The steam system is used to make in biochem to make pharmaceuticals, et cetera. And Boston, just to the south of Burlington, well, not just to the south, but obviously to the south. The meds and eds economy, the hospitals are really supported, on the STEAM system. I think there's 70 million square feet on the combined system in Cambridge and Boston. They've looked at, converting, but the STEAM does have some, some advantages, particularly in a dense urban environment. So Ken is correct that the system in St. Paul was designed for hot water, really under the leadership of a Swedish gentleman. But the predecessor was a steam system that was recovering heat from the, I think it was the light rail or the transit system, Ken, right? So the predecessor to St. Paul, there was a downtown steam system that, that we see today in Boston, Philadelphia, Denver, et cetera, San Francisco, major cities. So steam is still quite ubiquitous in the U.S., largely because these systems, are serving dense energy economies.
And you're still seeing steam systems depending upon what the customer needs are. So it really just depends. Certainly there's a movement to lower temperature and hot water systems, but steam is still is something that is being used. It depends upon the customer basis.
Right.
Another question that's coming up from a number of people is, do you account for CO2 emissions in burning wood? They wanted to hear a little bit more from each of you about CO2 emissions. If
I could just start quickly on that, I think, one thing I'd like to clarify is that most of these systems are really utilizing waste wood. It's process, it's residue, it's wood that was created by, storm events or manifestation of, borers, et cetera. This is not deforesting, the local economy. It's actually utilizing waste streams for productive use. But I'll let others talk to the carbon balance equation.
So in Minnesota, and which is also aligns with the EPA, biomass is considered to be carbon free energy. So we have emissions reports and our annual emissions reports to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, which also has to satisfy EPA. It is considered carbon free energy. Now, the other thing I think it's important to note is in the heat in Burlington, you're looking at taking heat from a power plant that's already consuming biomass. The heat is already there. It's being wasted. And so you're not releasing any more carbon by capturing that energy. You're capturing that energy and utilizing it. The carbon is already being released, whether you're considering a short cycle or not. Carbon is there. And so this is capturing waste heat is one of the great ways to actually reduce carbon emissions, particularly if you're displacing fossil fuels.
Thank you. Any of the others? Would you like to address that?
I would have to cite that I'm not an expert in the debate. And so when we have a provincial regulation with governing bodies who are experts in it and they deem biomass as a renewable energy fuel, it's not for me to argue.
Linda, I could add, again, not to the environmental economics of it necessarily, but one of the things we are seeing substantially in the EU, Germany is supporting investment in biomass district energy, principally out of energy security and energy economy, and to improve, really the local trade balance. Instead of importing, expensive and sometimes supply interrupted natural gas, the government is saying we need more energy independence from the local resources at hand. And so, I think that's contextual for Burlington. The McNeil station, is operational, as Ken mentioned, and essentially, the heat is currently being wasted. So, your carbon balance it will improve on the net if, in fact, the downstream users are displacing. It depends what they're displacing, right? How are they currently, providing comfort to the space or process use to the space? So, the economics and the true kind of, analysis really does require, a granular assessment. There are not really sort of rules of thumb that can be just readily applied. One does, and from my experience, looking at what the work that's gone into evaluating the McNeil station, I think the participants in this are being transparent and fulsome about the advantages of recovering this heat from McNeil.
Thank you. Markus, did you want to add anything there on how you measure CO2 emissions?
Well, we considered biological CO2 emissions as zero, but then you look at the whole life cycle assessment, then of course you have transportation and so on that gives you some emissions.
Right.
So we have environmental product declarations of our district heating, the heat that you use. But I think if we were to count the emissions from trees, for instance, why don't count the emissions from ourselves when we eat food? We exhaust a lot of carbon dioxide with every breath we take. So, yeah.
Okay.
I think just on this real quick, Linda, I think it's important to look at when you're thinking about biomass is what is the source of it? Certainly there's some places that are taking pellets out of one part of the world and moving it to another part of the world. I don't think that's particularly sustainable. But if you're looking at local waste streams, it's a fuel that's being in a community that is a waste stream that otherwise the carbon would be released. So in our facility here, our own pollution control agency is saying this carbon would be released and most likely would have to be open burned to get rid of it, just given the volume of material that we're handling. And there was really no other place for it to go. So I think it's important to think about what's the source of the energy and how it's being utilized. Most of our energy is coming within 50-mile radius of our facility.
Okay, thank you. Ken, there was another question directed at you, which is in terms of Elizabeth Palchuk had raised a question, which is that one of the challenges she's heard raised about the project in Burlington is burying the steam pipes in roads that are already filled with other pipes and infrastructure. Did St. Paul deal with this, and was it a challenge? And if so, how is it addressed, driving the cost through the roof?
We deal with it all the time. Every time we're putting in a steam line, or not a steam line, a hot water line in a street, we have to think about the other infrastructure that is located in. To the extent possible, one of the ways that we work together with other utilities, if there's other infrastructure that's going at the same time, if there's kind of a road surfacing or some other kind of projects, things like that can help reduce the cost. But we deal with this all the time, and every district energy system in an urban area deals with this.
And Linda, if I just an anecdote here in Boston, I met with the operators of the Cambridge Boston system recently, last week, in fact, and they said that they've put a 3,000-foot line in the Seaport area and a 4,000-foot line in the Fenway area, and and so it can be done. It's not for the faint of heart, of course, but actually adding this infrastructure as a resource, is economically and environmentally advantageous, and customers really want to be able to tap into, a district energy supply. So if you can do it in Boston, I would think that the underground is probably more complex and expensive than Burlington, but everything is site specific. It's not easy to to kind of thread the needle in an underground. It really does require some expertise. No kidding. So.
Okay, well, we have reached noon, and I apologize to those who asked great questions that we haven't completely answered. I hope that they will be able to be answered online through questions and responses with BED. But I want to especially thank all of our presenters for taking the time and thought to put into your presentations and to respond to a number of our questions. And we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the participants.
Thank you.